Martha sat by the window of her modest suburban home, watching the late summer rain slide down the glass in slow, uneven streams. Her fingers twitched slightly on the armrest of her wheelchair, the remnants of the stroke still pinching her right side with stubborn stiffness. The quiet house around her seemed to echo with the memories of a life that once felt so full, laughter bouncing off the walls, the smell of freshly baked bread, and the chatter of her children when they were young. Now, all that remained was silence and an ache deep inside that she couldn't quite put into words. The doctor's words played on a loop in her mind, "This is your new normal, Martha. It's time to accept it." Accept it? How could she? At 68, she had spent decades living a life filled with purpose, teaching kids, tending her garden, and dreaming of travels she never took. But now, her body betrayed her, the paralysis creeping in like a slow fog, robbing her of independence, of dignity. She was no longer the Martha she used to be. She felt invisible, like an old photograph fading on a forgotten shelf. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Martha turned on the television, hoping for distraction, anything to pierce through the heaviness inside her. The screen flickered to a news report about a new technology called Neuralink, Elon Musk's latest project that promised to restore movement and sensation to those who had lost it. She watched as the anchor spoke about the tiny brain implants that could bypass damaged nerves, sending direct signals from the mind to muscles. For a moment, something stirred in her, a fragile spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. Could this be real? Could she ever move her hand again? She closed her eyes and pictured herself standing, walking in the garden, feeling the earth beneath her feet. The thought was almost painful in its brightness, like a sudden sunbeam breaking through a cloudy sky. On the screen, a quote from Elon Musk flashed, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Those words hit her like a lifeline. Was it too late to fight? Could she still reclaim a life that felt stolen? The night deepened, and Martha's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe the world hadn't forgotten her after all. Maybe she still mattered. As she settled back into her chair, she whispered to the empty room, "What if everything I believed about getting old was wrong?" Her heart pulsed with a mix of fear and excitement, the first stirrings of a journey that would change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The life before the shift. Martha's life before the stroke had been a tapestry woven with colors of joy, routine, and quiet pride. She had grown up in a small Midwestern town, where neighbors still knew each other's names and front porches held afternoon conversations that stretched lazily into the evening. Her childhood was filled with simple pleasures, playing hide-and-seek with cousins in the backyard, summer picnics by the river, and the steady, reassuring presence of her parents who taught her the value of kindness and perseverance. After college, Martha became a schoolteacher, a calling she embraced with passion and tenderness. She loved her students like they were her own children, nurturing their curiosity and encouraging their dreams. The classroom was her stage, where she shone brightest, wielding words and ideas that opened doors for young minds. For 35 years, Martha shaped countless lives, always with a warm smile and a patient heart. Her marriage to Robert, her high school sweetheart, had been steady and full of shared dreams. They bought a modest home with a garden Martha tended lovingly, filling their yard with roses and daisies, a patchwork of color that reflected the life they built together. Their son, David, was the light of their lives, curious, bright, but with a restless spirit that led him away to the city after college, chasing ambitions that seemed so far from the quiet world of his parents. Looking back, Martha could see how time had slipped through her fingers like sand. The dreams she once whispered in the quiet of the night, traveling to Europe, learning to paint, writing a book, had been shelved, postponed for later, that never quite came. She remembered the summer of 2005, a golden day when she and Robert had packed a picnic and driven to a lakeside park. The air was warm, filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth, and Martha felt an overwhelming sense of peace as she watched David chase after dragonflies with a careless laugh. That day, the future had seemed endless, filled with possibilities and promise. Now, that memory was bittersweet, a symbol of the life she had lost. The years had marched on, bringing with them the inevitable changes: Robert's slow decline from heart disease, their quiet arguments growing louder in the silence of unspoken fears, David's rare visits turning into phone calls that never lasted long. The vibrant woman who once danced barefoot in the garden was now confined to a wheelchair, her body a prison that refused to obey her mind's commands. Martha felt the sting of loneliness deeply, an ache not just from isolation but from the invisible barrier that the stroke had erected between her and the world she loved. The faces she once knew were blurred by time and distance, and she feared becoming a ghost in her own story. In her quieter moments, she wrestled with regret. What if she had fought harder for her marriage? What if she had reached out to David more? What if she hadn't ignored the warning signs of her health? These questions haunted her, swirling in a storm of self-doubt and sorrow. Yet, beneath it all, there was a flicker of resilience that refused to be extinguished. Martha was not a woman who surrendered easily. She clung to memories not as chains, but as reminders of who she was and who she might still become. Her living room was filled with remnants of that past: a faded photo of her wedding day, a stack of well-worn books, a small ceramic bird Robert had gifted her on their 10th anniversary. These objects were anchors in a sea of uncertainty, symbols of a self she hoped to reclaim. On certain mornings, when the light filtered softly through the lace curtains, Martha would close her eyes and imagine the life that could be waiting for her beyond this prison of flesh. She pictured herself writing again, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as stories poured out of her heart. She dreamed of reconnecting with David, bridging the distance that years had widened. But these dreams often felt fragile, fragile as a spider's web in the wind. The hardest part was feeling forgotten, not just by the world, but sometimes by herself. The vibrant, capable woman she once was seemed like a stranger lurking in the shadows of her own mind. The slow erosion of time and health had made her question her worth, her relevance. She felt like a faded star, dimmed by circumstance, drifting away from the orbit of life. One afternoon, Martha found herself sitting on the porch swing, the humid summer air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass. Her hands rested on her lap, one trembling slightly. She thought about the phone call from her daughter-in-law last week, a polite but distant message that David was too busy to visit. The words cut deeper than she expected. A sense of invisibility washed over her, and for the first time in a long while, tears welled up in her eyes. But even in that moment of despair, a small voice whispered that she was not done yet. That she could still find a way back. It was in that quiet moment that she heard about Neuralink. The idea that a company was working on technology to restore movement, to bridge the gap between mind and body, felt like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Elon Musk, the man behind it, was often in the news for pushing boundaries, breaking molds, refusing to accept limits. Hearing about his vision, Martha felt a stirring of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The thought that maybe, just maybe, the world was still full of possibilities was enough to make her sit a little straighter in her chair. For the first time, the future looked like something she could reach for again. And with that spark, the weight of her regrets, the loneliness, the fear, they did not vanish, but they became lighter. A challenge, not a sentence. Martha had lived long enough to know that life was unpredictable, sometimes cruel, but also filled with moments of grace and unexpected beauty. This was her moment to decide. Would she let the shadows claim her, or would she step into the light of something new? The choice was hers, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to try. The inner war Martha's days became a battleground where hope and despair fought fiercely for control. Each morning she awoke to the cold reality of her body's limitations, the stubborn paralysis that refused to loosen its grip on her right side, the exhaustion that settled deep in her bones, and the nagging ache of loneliness that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. But beneath the surface of physical pain was an even tougher war raging inside her mind. Was it too late? Could she still matter? Could she still change? These questions haunted her relentlessly, echoing in the silence of her small home. The world outside continued to spin, filled with young faces rushing by, technology evolving at a dizzying pace, and lives moving forward, without her. Her children, once her lifelines, had become voices on the phone, brief and distracted. David, her son, was polite but distant, caught in his own busy world. Her daughter-in-law's calls were curt and impersonal. Friends had drifted away, unable to cope with the change or unsure how to reach out. Even her doctor, though kind, seemed resigned, advising her gently to slow down, to focus on comfort rather than recovery. "There are limits, Martha," he said softly during her last visit. "Sometimes the best we can do is acceptance." Those words felt like a verdict. Acceptance. A word that tasted bitter on her tongue. She wasn't ready to accept being sidelined, forgotten, or diminished. But the weight of doubt threatened to crush her spirit. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house was still and her thoughts grew loud, she wrestled with a harsh truth: maybe no one cared anymore. Maybe she was invisible. One evening, while scrolling through her phone in search of distraction, a headline caught her eye: Neuralink breakthrough, restoring mobility for disabled patients. Her heart skipped. She clicked, watching a video interview with Elon Musk, whose voice was both calm and electric with possibility. He spoke about defying limitations, about how technology could rewrite the rules of what the human body and mind could do. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," Musk said. Those words echoed in Martha's mind like a mantra. She replayed them over and over, feeling a strange mix of skepticism and hope. Could she be one of those patients? Could this be the chance to fight back against the slow fade? The next day, Martha found herself sharing the video with her daughter, hoping to spark a conversation. The response was lukewarm. "Mom, I don't want you to get your hopes up," her daughter said, cautious and protective. "It sounds experimental and risky." The skepticism stung, but Martha understood. Her family loved her but feared disappointment. Still, that night, she lay awake thinking about Elon Musk's words and the possibility that maybe change was still within reach. She felt the stirrings of a rebellion inside her, a refusal to accept her shrinking world. The inner war was not just about her body, but about her identity. Was she a woman defined by her limitations or by her courage to keep fighting? The days that followed were filled with small battles. At physical therapy, Martha pushed herself against the boundaries of pain and fatigue, sometimes falling into despair when progress seemed impossible. Her mind would spiral into dark places, wondering if all this effort was futile. Yet, each time she caught herself slipping, she would recall Musk's vision, of pushing boundaries, breaking molds, defying odds. In moments of doubt, she would whisper, "What if the limits are only what I believe?" The conflict was not just internal. At family gatherings, well-meaning relatives offered advice cloaked in concern. "Maybe it's time to slow down, Martha. You have to be realistic." Their words felt like chains, attempts to anchor her to a fate she refused to accept. Even strangers, when they learned of her condition, treated her like a cautionary tale, pity clouding their eyes. The world seemed to urge her to disappear quietly. But the voice inside her fought back fiercely. Martha's solitude became a crucible where hope was tested. One afternoon, scrolling through her phone again, she found a Neuralink podcast. The conversation between Musk and a neurologist fascinated her. They spoke about the technology's potential to restore autonomy, to reconnect minds and bodies, to rewrite futures. For the first time, the future seemed real, tangible, something she could reach out and grasp. Inspired, Martha began to research, devouring articles, videos, and forums where patients shared their stories. She found a community she hadn't expected, people like her who refused to give up, who saw technology not as a threat but as a beacon. But hope brought its own challenges. Fear lurked in the shadows, fear of pain, of failure, of disappointment. The idea of having something implanted in her brain was terrifying. What if it went wrong? What if she was a guinea pig? The practical hurdles also loomed large. How would she afford it? Would her family support such a choice? Was she brave enough? One evening, after a particularly difficult day in therapy, Martha found herself in tears. The weight of years pressed down on her. She felt broken, fragile, lost. But then, in a quiet moment of clarity, she reached for her phone and typed a note to herself: I am more than my fears. I am more than my past. The next morning, she called the Neuralink Research Center to ask about trials. The receptionist's voice was polite but cautious. We're still enrolling participants, she said. There are many steps, but we're happy to provide information. That call was a small victory, a step into the unknown. Over the weeks that followed, Martha faced new tests, not just physical but emotional. Friends questioned her choice, her children oscillated between support and concern. Every step forward was met with resistance, but the glimmers of progress fueled her resolve. She remembered Musk's words again and again, letting them become a shield against despair. The inner war continued, fierce and unrelenting, but Martha was no longer a passive victim. She was a fighter, ready to challenge every assumption about aging, loss, and possibility. The war was far from over, but she had found her first victories, in hope, in courage, in the simple act of saying, I will try. The one thing they changed. Martha woke up that morning with a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. The news about Neuralink had ignited something inside her, a small flame flickering in the depths of her soul that refused to be snuffed out. She was tired of waiting for miracles, it was time to become the miracle. The first step was simple but bold: she would take control of her story instead of letting it control her. After breakfast, she wheeled herself over to the small desk by the window, where her laptop sat unopened for months. Dust motes floated in the golden sunlight as she powered it on, the familiar hum comforting in a way that reminded her of better days. She opened a blank document and typed a single sentence: Today, I choose to fight. From that moment on, Martha committed herself to learning everything about Neuralink, the technology that promised to reconnect minds and bodies in ways once thought impossible. She scoured medical journals, watched interviews with Elon Musk, and joined online forums where other patients shared their hopes and fears. Each story she read was a spark feeding her own growing fire. She realized she was not alone, thousands of people faced the same battles, and many were refusing to surrender. One evening, after an especially inspiring podcast featuring a patient who had regained partial movement through Neuralink trials, Martha picked up her phone and dialed the local rehabilitation center connected with the research. The voice on the other end was warm and professional. After explaining her interest and condition, Martha was invited to a preliminary consultation. The news filled her with cautious excitement. This was no longer just a distant dream, but a tangible possibility. But the biggest change was yet to come, not in the science or the technology, but in how Martha chose to connect with her son. For years, David had drifted away, their relationship strained by distance, misunderstandings, and unspoken regrets. Martha's attempts to reach out often ended in silence or brief, awkward conversations. She had buried her hurt deep, afraid to admit how much she missed him. Inspired by the Neuralink stories of connection and restoration, Martha decided to break the cycle. She wrote him a long email, honest and raw, sharing her struggles, her hopes, and her willingness to try again. She admitted her mistakes, expressed her love, and asked for a chance to rebuild what had been lost. Sending the email felt like stepping off a cliff, the fear of rejection almost overwhelming. But she held on to Musk's words about daring to do the impossible when something is important enough. Days passed with no reply, each one stretching longer than the last. Martha's mind wavered between hope and despair, the old inner war flaring anew. Then, one evening, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David: "Mom, I'm here. Let's talk." The floodgates opened. Over the next weeks, their conversations grew more frequent and sincere, each one a fragile thread weaving their bond back together. This renewed connection fueled Martha's spirit in ways she hadn't anticipated. At her consultation, the doctors explained the Neuralink trial process in detail, the assessments, the implantation procedure, the risks and potential benefits. Martha listened intently, her mind racing but resolute. She signed the consent forms with steady hands, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Preparing for the procedure required her to adopt a disciplined routine. She began gentle exercises to strengthen her muscles and improve her stamina. Each morning, she would will herself outside for short walks along the garden path, feeling the sun on her face and the earth beneath the wheels. The physical activity was exhausting but exhilarating, a tangible step toward reclaiming control. Simultaneously, Martha started blogging about her journey, sharing her story openly on a community platform dedicated to aging and technology. Her posts, filled with honesty, vulnerability, and humor, resonated with readers across the country. Messages poured in, from people her age who felt invisible, from caregivers who found inspiration, from younger generations who admired her courage. This virtual community became a lifeline, reminding Martha that she was part of something bigger than her own struggles. Elon Musk's presence was subtle but constant, a symbol of fearless innovation and relentless pursuit of what others deemed impossible. Martha often thought of his bold vision of humanity's future, how he challenged the status quo and dared to dream beyond limits. His voice, filtered through interviews and articles, became an internal coach urging her forward. Yet, amid the excitement, fear remained a quiet companion. The risks of the trial weighed heavily on her mind. What if the implant caused complications? What if she didn't respond to the treatment? What if she was setting herself up for heartbreak? She shared these fears with her new online friends, who offered encouragement and empathy, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to move forward despite it. The day of the procedure arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Martha was escorted to a sleek clinical facility filled with the hum of machines and the soft murmur of staff preparing for their work. The sterile scent mingled with the faint aroma of coffee from a nearby break room. As she lay on the operating table, a mix of anxiety and hope flooded her senses. The surgeon's voice was calm as they explained the steps, and the nurses offered reassuring smiles. Martha closed her eyes, envisioning a future where she could once again move her hand, where her body would respond to the desires of her mind. The surgery was over before she knew it, and she awoke in a recovery room, her head tender but her spirit soaring. The days that followed were a blur of tests, monitoring, and cautious optimism. At first, there was no noticeable change, and doubt crept in. But Martha reminded herself that transformation took time. She kept her blog updated, sharing every small sensation, every flicker of hope, every frustration. Her readers cheered her on, their support a balm to her soul. Then, one morning, as she reached for her coffee cup, a small but unmistakable movement stirred in her fingers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A spark of life in a dormant limb. Tears filled Martha's eyes. The impossible was beginning to unfold. She called David, her voice trembling with emotion. "I moved my hand," she whispered. "Just a little, but it's real." Over the next weeks, the movements grew stronger and more controlled. Martha practiced diligently, guided by therapists and fueled by an unyielding desire to reclaim her independence. The inner war that had once threatened to consume her was replaced by a fierce determination and growing joy. Martha's journey was no longer about loss but about rediscovery. The small, bold choice to embrace change, to trust in the unknown, had ignited a transformation that reached far beyond physical recovery. It rekindled relationships, built new communities, and restored a sense of purpose. She was no longer waiting for life to happen to her. She was living it, fully, boldly, and without apology. Breaking through the morning sun spilled softly through the window, casting warm light across Martha's room as she sat at her desk, fingers trembling but purposeful. The small movement she had felt days ago was no longer a flicker but a burgeoning flame of progress. Her hand, once inert and lifeless, now responded, slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. Tears welled up as she clenched and unclenched her fingers, each motion a triumph over years of stillness and despair. The journey had been long and grueling, filled with moments where the weight of doubt threatened to overwhelm her. Yet now, here she was, breaking through the invisible walls that had confined her body and spirit. It wasn't just about movement, it was about reclaiming her identity, her agency, her hope. Word of her progress spread quietly at first, shared in support groups and online communities that cheered every small victory as a step toward a larger revolution. Then, unexpectedly, a local news station caught wind of her story. A young reporter named Jenna reached out, intrigued by Martha's courage and the cutting-edge technology changing the game for disabled patients. When the camera crew arrived, Martha was nervous but resolute. She wanted to tell the truth, the struggle, the fear, the hope. As the cameras rolled, she spoke honestly, her voice steady but infused with emotion. "For years, I thought this was the end of my story," she said, eyes shining with tears. "But thanks to this technology, and the people who dared to dream beyond limits, I'm discovering a new beginning." The segment aired during the evening news and quickly went viral. Messages flooded her inbox, from people inspired by her determination, from others facing similar battles who found courage in her story, and from strangers who simply wanted to say thank you for reminding them that age was not a prison. David watched the segment late at night, his heart swelling with pride and regret. He reached out again, this time more often, their conversations deepening into moments of honest connection and healing. Martha felt the walls between them crumble, replaced by a fragile but growing trust. But breakthroughs are rarely without setbacks. One afternoon, after a therapy session that left her exhausted and frustrated, Martha faced a moment of doubt. Her hand, which had shown such promise, seemed stiff and uncooperative. The frustration boiled over, and she collapsed into tears, overwhelmed by the unpredictability of progress. In those moments, the old fears whispered that this was all just an illusion, that the body would betray her again, that hope was a cruel tease. Yet, even in despair, she found strength. Drawing on the example of Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation despite countless failures, Martha reminded herself that progress was not linear. Failure was part of the journey, a necessary step toward breakthrough. She reached out to her online community, sharing her setback openly. The flood of encouragement and shared experiences lifted her spirits, reminding her she was not alone. She realized that vulnerability was not weakness but a bridge to resilience. As weeks turned into months, Martha's progress accelerated. Her hand movements became more fluid, and she began to regain limited use of her arm. Physical therapy sessions, once dreaded, became moments of empowerment. The body she thought had betrayed her was, in fact, capable of change, of healing, of reclaiming its strength. Alongside physical breakthroughs, Martha's emotional journey deepened. The isolation that once defined her existence gave way to connection. Friends, old and new, rallied around her. Her blog blossomed into a platform for sharing stories of hope and innovation, inspiring readers nationwide. She was invited to speak at events focused on aging, technology, and resilience, her voice becoming a beacon for those who felt forgotten or too old to change. One evening, as she prepared for a virtual conference, Martha reflected on how far she had come. The woman who once sat alone in her quiet house, feeling invisible and defeated, was now a symbol of possibility. She remembered Elon Musk's words about doing what was important despite the odds. "I was never too old," she whispered to herself, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The conference was a watershed moment. Martha shared her story live with hundreds of viewers, many of whom reached out afterward to express how deeply she had touched them. The questions, the messages, the heartfelt thanks reaffirmed that her journey was about more than personal recovery, it was about igniting a movement. The world was watching, and she was ready to lead by example. But perhaps the most poignant breakthrough came in a quiet moment at home. One afternoon, David arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small box wrapped in paper. They sat together in the garden, the late afternoon sun warming their faces. David handed her the box with a tentative smile. Inside was a collection of old letters and photographs, memories of their shared past that had been tucked away and forgotten. Tears streamed down Martha's cheeks as she realized this gesture was more than sentimental, it was a bridge to the future. They spent hours talking, laughing, sometimes crying, unraveling years of distance and pain. In that moment, Martha understood that breakthroughs were not just physical but deeply human, a restoration of relationships, trust, and love. Her story was no longer about fading away, it was about rising, reconnecting, and thriving. The journey was far from over, but Martha had broken through the barriers of fear, isolation, and despair. The fire Elon Musk had sparked within her had grown into a blaze, lighting the way forward not just for herself but for countless others. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew this was just the beginning of a new legacy, one defined by courage, hope, and the unyielding belief that it is never too late to change. The new legacy. Martha sat quietly on the porch, the soft hum of evening settling over her small town like a comforting blanket. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, fading slowly into twilight, much like the chapters of her own life, once filled with sharp edges of pain and regret, now softening into something hopeful and new. She cradled a steaming cup of tea, her fingers moving with a newfound grace that still felt miraculous. Just months ago, the simple act of holding a cup had been impossible. Now, it was a symbol of how far she had come. Reflecting on her journey, Martha understood that her transformation wasn't just about regaining movement, it was about reclaiming her sense of self and purpose. For years, she had felt invisible, trapped in a body and life that seemed to have no place for her anymore. But through the struggles, the doubts, and the breakthroughs, she had discovered something profound: she was never too old to change. The technology that had reignited her body's ability to move was extraordinary, but it was the human spirit behind it, the daring, the refusal to accept limits, that had made the real difference. Martha often thought of Elon Musk, the visionary whose relentless push against boundaries had sparked her own rebellion against defeat. His words, echoing through interviews and articles, reminded her daily that age, fear, and failure were not cages but challenges to overcome. Her renewed relationship with David was perhaps the most cherished part of her new legacy. What had begun as tentative conversations blossomed into a deep bond, healing wounds that once seemed irreparable. Together, they talked about the future, about dreams deferred and new ones yet to be born. David often marveled at his mother's resilience, inspired not only by her physical recovery but by her refusal to surrender to despair. Their story became a beacon for others. Proof that even fractured relationships could find restoration when nurtured with honesty and love. Martha's blog, which had started as a personal diary of hope and hardship, evolved into a vibrant community of older adults sharing their journeys with technology, aging, and rediscovery. She used her voice to advocate for greater inclusion of seniors in innovation, challenging the narrative that youth alone were the agents of change. She spoke at conferences, participated in panels, and collaborated with researchers to ensure that the needs and wisdom of her generation were not overlooked. The local community embraced her as a symbol of possibility. Neighbors stopped to share their own stories of struggle and courage, inspired by her example. The garden she once tended alone became a gathering place for friends old and new, a space where stories blossomed alongside flowers. Martha realized that legacy was not about grand monuments or fame but about the ripples one created in the lives of others. Her legacy was the spark of hope she had ignited in herself and others, the permission to believe that it is never too late to matter, to grow, to fight. She understood now that aging was not a sunset but a dawn, a time rich with opportunity to redefine oneself. As she looked out over the quiet street, Martha felt a deep gratitude for the journey, the moments of darkness that had made the light shine brighter, the fears that had forged courage, the losses that had opened space for love. Her story was not just her own but part of a larger human narrative of resilience and transformation. The future stretched ahead, unknown and wide open, filled with possibilities she had once thought impossible. Martha whispered to the evening air, "This is not the end. It is just the beginning." And in that moment, she knew with unwavering certainty that she was ready, to live, to love, to inspire, and to leave a legacy that would outlast her years. Because she was never too old. She was just waiting for permission to matter again. The new journey. After months of grueling effort and countless small victories, Martha could feel the change, not just in her body but deep within her soul. Every subtle movement of her fingers, every step she managed to take, wasn't just a physical triumph but a testament to an unbreakable will. The electricity of progress coursed through her veins, fueling her determination to keep pushing forward through long, exhausting days of therapy. But this new journey was about more than recovery. It was about rebuilding a life she had thought lost forever, laying down new foundations for a future she had never dared to imagine. Martha dove headfirst into learning everything she could about Neuralink. To her, it wasn't just a medical device, it was a symbol of hope, a bridge between mind and body, a connection between human resilience and cutting-edge technology. She wanted to understand how it worked, to follow every step of its development, every test and breakthrough that could one day transform the lives of thousands like her. This curiosity made her a relentless learner and a passionate advocate. Her blog evolved from a simple personal diary into a dynamic platform filled with insight, emotion, and calls for community action. She wrote about her experiences with Neuralink, the emotional roller coaster of aging and disability, and the fierce fight to reclaim dignity and purpose. Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations and building a network of readers who shared their own struggles and triumphs. Friendships blossomed in this digital community. Through video calls and virtual meetups, Martha found a vibrant support system that stretched far beyond her small town. She was no longer alone in her fight. Shared stories of pain and hope wove a tapestry of human connection that lifted her spirits on the hardest days and multiplied joy on the best. One afternoon, during an online seminar about advances in rehabilitation technology, Martha received an unexpected invitation to join a research team at a top university. They were developing new software to enhance Neuralink's interface, aiming to improve its responsiveness and ease of use for patients. This opportunity opened a thrilling new chapter, not just as a user of the technology but as a collaborator and innovator. Though nervous about stepping into unfamiliar territory at her age, Martha embraced the challenge with the same courage that had carried her this far. She knew innovation was not the exclusive domain of the young, it was a call to all who dared to learn and adapt. Working alongside engineers, scientists, and developers, Martha shared her first-hand experience, highlighting the challenges and hopes of users. Her input shaped design choices and helped guide research priorities. Each meeting was a milestone, each suggestion valued and taken seriously. Meanwhile, her relationship with David grew stronger and richer. They were no longer just mother and son but partners on this unexpected journey. David learned patience and empathy, savoring the quiet moments and small victories. Martha learned to open her heart again, shedding years of doubt and guardedness. Together, they planned short trips to nearby parks and nature spots, where Martha could taste freedom in every step she took, however tentative. These outings were not just simple pleasures, they were bold declarations of independence and resilience. One late night, sitting by the window watching stars twinkle against the dark sky, Martha's thoughts wandered back to the lonely days and nights when despair threatened to swallow her whole. Now, everything had changed. She was no longer the woman confined to a wheelchair, fading into the background of a fast-moving world. She was alive, vibrant, and determined, ready to claim every moment she had left. Smiling softly, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The limitations she once feared were now challenges to overcome, not walls to stop her. She had given herself permission to dream again, to imagine a future full of possibility. From her cozy kitchen, Martha began sketching plans for community programs, places where older adults like her could learn about technology, regain confidence, and connect with the world around them. She wanted to build a network of support and empowerment, a movement to rewrite what aging meant in the 21st century. During a local event, Martha quoted Elon Musk, telling the crowd, "When you dare to think differently, you start to change the world." Looking into the eager eyes of her listeners, she saw reflected their own flickers of hope and determination. Martha realized her journey was no longer just personal, it had become a beacon for many searching for voice, recognition, and meaning. With a heart full of fire and an unyielding spirit, she embodied the truth that no one is ever too old to make a difference. As the stage lights dimmed and applause faded, Martha knew the road ahead would hold challenges, but it also brimmed with promise. With technology advancing hand in hand with human courage, the future belonged to those bold enough to step out of the shadows, live authentically, and change the world in their own way. A spark in the crowd. The lights were hot on her face, but Martha didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of the stage, gripping the microphone a little too tightly, her heart thudding in her chest like a drum echoing across a canyon. The auditorium was filled with more than 200 people, many of them older adults, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, some standing on their own but with the same quiet look in their eyes, tired, forgotten, hopeful. Behind them were students, researchers, caregivers, all drawn by the same thing, a flyer that read, Technology, Aging, and the Human Spirit, a conversation with Martha Rhodes. It was surreal to her. Not long ago, she had been sitting alone in her kitchen, watching the world pass her by. Now she was standing before it, and it was looking back. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and began. "I want to tell you the truth," she said, voice steady. "Not the cleaned-up version. The real one." The room fell silent. 3 years ago, I believed my life was over. My body was failing. My family was distant. I felt invisible, like I was slowly fading into the background of everything. I didn't think I mattered anymore. A murmur of agreement swept through the older section of the crowd, quiet but affirming. Martha continued. Then one night I was scrolling through the news on my phone, something I rarely did. I came across a clip of Elon Musk talking about Neuralink. I didn't know what Neuralink was. All I heard him say was something like, "We have the ability to restore mobility using brain signals. We can reconnect what's been lost." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't back away from it. Something in me shifted. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I'd even qualify. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel dead inside. I felt angry. Angry that I'd given up on myself. Angry that the world didn't expect more of people like me. A soft ripple moved through the crowd. Eyes locked on her. They weren't just listening, they were seeing themselves in her words. So I did one thing. Just one. I reached out. I asked questions. I found other people. I tried. She told them everything. About the Neuralink trial, the first twitch of her fingers, the day she held a coffee cup again, the setback where she thought she'd lost it all, the email from her son, the blog that turned into a movement. She didn't embellish it. She just laid it bare. And now, she said, voice stronger, I wake up every morning knowing that even if I'm not the same as I once was, I am not less. I am more. More awake. More alive. And I'm here to tell you, whatever your age, whatever your struggle, it is not too late. You are not done. She paused. The room was hushed, not with boredom but with breathless attention. Then it happened. Someone stood up. An older man with gray hair and a brace around his leg. "My name's Carl," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I had a stroke 2 years ago. Haven't spoken in front of people since. But your story," he looked at Martha with eyes full of tears. "It woke something up in me. Thank you." The crowd applauded. One by one, more people began to speak. A woman named Deborah who'd been caring for her husband with ALS for 10 years. A young tech developer who'd lost his grandmother to Parkinson's and now wanted to design accessible tools for the elderly. A retired teacher who said she'd been afraid to even use email until she started reading Martha's blog. It was no longer a speech. It had become a shared awakening. That night, long after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, Martha sat on the edge of the stage with her son David, who had flown in to see her speak. You were incredible, he said, eyes glowing with pride. Mom, she turned to him, smiling. I didn't do it alone. Still, he said. You lit a fire. She thought about that as they sat there, the empty chairs now just quiet witnesses to something important. Not just a talk. A shift. A spark. She thought of all the people who came up afterward, pressing her hand, sharing their stories. They didn't want to be saved. They just wanted to be seen. And now they were. Over the next few months, invitations poured in. Podcasts. Panels. University lectures. Elder care centers. Martha didn't accept all of them, she wasn't chasing attention. But when a request came that felt like it could make a difference, she showed up. And every time she spoke, it wasn't about her, it was about all of them. Every older adult who'd been told to slow down, to sit still, to stop dreaming. Every person who had a story inside but no one to hear it. She started a program called Still Rising, focused on connecting aging adults with emerging tech. Through small grants and virtual mentorship, it helped seniors experiment with tools they'd been told weren't for them. From speech-to-text writing software to adaptive VR games to robotics that assisted with mobility and independence. Elon Musk heard about it through one of his team members. A week later, Martha received a short, direct email from his assistant. Mr. Musk would like to thank you personally for the work you're doing. If you're open to it, he'd love to connect. She stared at it for 10 minutes before replying. The video call was brief, but Martha never forgot it. Elon, true to form, didn't waste time on pleasantries. What you're doing matters, he told her. We build tools. But people like you build meaning. Keep going. That was all. And it was more than enough. The call ended. Martha sat quietly for a long time afterward. It wasn't that she had spoken to Elon Musk, it was that everything had come full circle. A moment of inspiration had sparked a decision. That decision had led to change. And now, the spark had become a flame that was lighting the way for others. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she was creating legacy. A real one. One evening, while hosting a local meetup for the Still Rising community, Martha watched as a woman in her 70s showed a group how to use a motion-controlled tablet she'd learned about in the program. A man with advanced MS had built a custom brace using a 3D printer. A teenage girl sat beside her grandfather, showing him how to write his memoir using dictation software. Martha didn't say much that night. She didn't need to. She just stood there and watched it all unfold. A room filled with people society had written off, and every one of them was rising. She went home that night with a full heart. As she turned off the lights and looked out her window into the dark, she smiled to herself. It wasn't about Neuralink anymore. Not really. It had started with the brain, yes. But now it was all heart. And in that quiet moment, she whispered, "We are not done." A door reopened. The email sat in Martha's inbox for 3 days before she had the courage to open it. The subject line was simple, "Are you still there?" The sender, Emily. Her daughter. Her estranged daughter. Martha stared at the name for what felt like an eternity, her breath caught between fear and hope. Emily hadn't spoken to her in nearly 9 years. The last time they were in the same room, it had ended in shouting, slammed doors, and silence that stretched like a canyon between them. And now, out of nowhere, a message. She clicked it. Inside was only one line. "I saw the article. I saw you. I don't know what to say. But if you're open to it, I'd like to talk." Martha read it again, and again, and again. Her hands trembled, not from Neuralink's limitations but from the weight of memory. The years of missed birthdays, unspoken apologies, swallowed grief. Emily had always been the firebrand, opinionated, sensitive, stubborn. So much like Martha herself, which may have been part of the problem. After her father's death, Emily had drifted, resentful and distant, feeling, Martha suspected, abandoned. But Martha had been grieving too, overwhelmed with loneliness and responsibility. Somewhere in that chaos, they had lost each other. Now, standing in her small kitchen, Martha reached for her tea, steadying her hand before she typed back. "I'm still here. And I'd love to talk." She didn't sleep much that night. Her mind replayed old scenes like an unfinished movie. The Christmas Emily hadn't shown up. The voicemail Martha never returned. The letter she had written and deleted 100 times. Regret clung to her like dust, but under it, something new pulsed, possibility. When they finally spoke, via video call, it was awkward at first. Emily was older, of course. But the curve of her jaw, the intensity in her eyes, it was like looking into a mirror of the past. "You look good," Emily said, then added quickly, "I mean, better than I expected." They both laughed, awkward and honest. Martha nodded. "So do you." A long pause. "I'm sorry, Mom," Emily said, voice cracking. "I was angry." A room filled with people society had written off, and every one of them was rising. She went home that night with a full heart. As she turned off the lights and looked out her window into the dark, she smiled to herself. It wasn't about Neuralink anymore. Not really. It had started with the brain, yes. But now it was all heart. And in that quiet moment, she whispered, "We are not done." A door reopened. The email sat in Martha's inbox for 3 days before she had the courage to open it. The subject line was simple, "Are you still there?" The sender, Emily. Her daughter. Her estranged daughter. Martha stared at the name for what felt like an eternity, her breath caught between fear and hope. Emily hadn't spoken to her in nearly 9 years. The last time they were in the same room, it had ended in shouting, slammed doors, and silence that stretched like a canyon between them. And now, out of nowhere, a message. She clicked it. Inside was only one line. "I saw the article. I saw you. I don't know what to say. But if you're open to it, I'd like to talk." Martha read it again, and again, and again. Her hands trembled, not from Neuralink's limitations but from the weight of memory. The years of missed birthdays, unspoken apologies, swallowed grief. Emily had always been the firebrand, opinionated, sensitive, stubborn. So much like Martha herself, which may have been part of the problem. After her father's death, Emily had drifted, resentful and distant, feeling, Martha suspected, abandoned. But Martha had been grieving too, overwhelmed with loneliness and responsibility. Somewhere in that chaos, they had lost each other. Now, standing in her small kitchen, Martha reached for her tea, steadying her hand before she typed back. "I'm still here. And I'd love to talk." She didn't sleep much that night. Her mind replayed old scenes like an unfinished movie. The Christmas Emily hadn't shown up. The voicemail Martha never returned. The letter she had written and deleted 100 times. Regret clung to her like dust, but under it, something new pulsed, possibility. When they finally spoke, via video call, it was awkward at first. Emily was older, of course. But the curve of her jaw, the intensity in her eyes, it was like looking into a mirror of the past. "You look good," Emily said, then added quickly, "I mean, better than I expected." They both laughed, awkward and honest. Martha nodded. "So do you." A long pause. "I'm sorry, Mom," Emily said, voice cracking. "I was angry. For a long time. I felt like you didn't fight for me." Martha's throat tightened. "And I thought you didn't need me anymore." Another pause, but it was softer now. "Maybe we were both wrong," Emily whispered. "Maybe we both ran from the same pain." Martha nodded. "But I never stopped loving you." The call didn't solve everything. They didn't unpack every wound in one conversation. But it opened a door that had long been shut. And for the first time in almost a decade, they walked through it, together. Over the next weeks, they spoke regularly. Emily had built a life in Portland, graphic designer, yoga enthusiast, recently divorced, no children, but close with her rescue dog, Milo. She had followed Martha's progress from afar, through articles, blog posts, even a podcast interview someone sent her. "I was proud," Emily said one night. "I just didn't know how to say it." Martha smiled. "You just did." They began making plans for a visit. Emily would come for the holidays. David, surprised but delighted, agreed to fly in too. "A family reunion," he joked. "Do we need name tags?" Martha laughed, but her heart was full. Something she thought had been lost forever was returning, slowly, carefully, but real. In the meantime, Martha threw herself back into her work. Still Rising was growing faster than she had imagined. What started as a blog had turned into a non-profit with volunteer chapters in 8 cities. Tech companies reached out to collaborate. Universities asked for her input on senior-focused design. She even received an invitation to speak at a TEDx event. "Me?" she asked the organizer on the phone. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," he replied. "You're the voice people didn't know they needed." The talk, titled "You're Not Too Late, You're Right on Time," was scheduled for April. She had months to prepare, but the words had already begun forming in her heart. She would tell them everything, the pain, the paralysis, the comeback, the reconnection. And she would make sure they heard the message loud and clear: relevance isn't defined by age, and purpose doesn't expire. One afternoon, while reviewing some early notes for the talk, Martha got a call from a local rehab center. A woman named Angela, in her mid-60s, had just been approved for Neuralink and was terrified. "She's read your story," the therapist said. "She asked if she could meet you." Martha agreed without hesitation. She arrived the next day, moving slowly but confidently, her cane tapping rhythmically on the linoleum floor. Angela was thin, her face drawn, her eyes filled with the same fear Martha once knew all too well. "I don't think I can do it," Angela said quietly. "What if I fail?" Martha smiled gently. "Then you'll be just like all of us at the start. Failing is part of the process. Fear is just proof that you're doing something brave." They spoke for over an hour, and by the end, Angela was smiling too. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "But maybe that's okay." "It is," Martha said. "You're not alone." On the way home, she thought about how strange life was. How one decision, one spark, could ripple out so far. From a shaky first step to helping others take theirs. From a lonely kitchen to stages and conversations and second chances. That evening, she received a text from Emily. "Hey, Mom. Just finished rewatching your talk from the Health Tech Summit." I cried. Not because it was sad. Because it was you. The real you. And I missed her. Martha stared at the screen, heart aching in the best way. She typed back, "She missed you too." The next morning, she woke up early, just as the sun began pouring in through the window. She stood at the sink, holding her coffee, no trembling now, just quiet strength, and looked out at the small garden she had once abandoned. The flowers were in bloom again. She thought about her journey, still unfinished, still uncertain, and smiled. Life hadn't just given her a second chance. She had taken it. Reached for it. Fought for it. And in doing so, she had found something deeper than recovery. She had found reconciliation. Relevance. Renewal. And in the heart of it all, a reopened door. Not just to a relationship or a moment, but to the rest of her life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The TEDx stage. She stood just off stage, her fingers gently wrapped around the curved handle of her cane, her other hand gripping the small note card she hadn't actually needed in weeks. The red TEDx carpet, shaped like a bold target at center stage, glowed under the lights. Behind the curtain, she could hear the host introducing her. Our next speaker is living proof that age doesn't limit courage, technology doesn't exclude wisdom, and that sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that almost gave up speaking. The audience applauded, a respectful and curious wave of sound, and then quieted again. Martha took a breath, not to calm herself, but to center the power she knew had been waiting to speak for decades. She stepped forward. Her cane made a soft click on the stage floor as she moved toward the red circle. She didn't feel fear. She felt ready. She looked out over the crowd, hundreds of faces, some young, some old, some watching from the edge of their seats, others arms crossed, skeptical. She smiled gently. And then, she began. 2 years ago, she said, I was sitting alone in a beige rehab center, wondering if I would ever hold a fork again, let alone feel human. My body had betrayed me, or at least that's how it felt. I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't even open a jar of jam without crying. My son had stopped calling. My daughter hadn't spoken to me in years. I thought I was done. She paused. The silence was full, leaning forward. Then I watched a video of a man with a strange name and even stranger ideas. Elon Musk. He was talking about something called Neuralink. At first I didn't understand a word. But I remember one sentence. He said, we're building a future where injury doesn't have to mean imprisonment. And that sentence, that one idea, woke something up inside me. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Just, refusal. I refused to believe that this was it. That I would fade into the wallpaper of society like so many of us do once we hit a certain age or need help to eat. The audience didn't move. She had them. And she knew it. So I asked questions. I emailed. I called. I joined a research trial. I showed up. And over time, little by little, I came back to life. Not just my body. My voice. My will. My place in the world. She shifted slightly, the cane steady beneath her hand, and lifted her eyes to the audience again. I want to say something that may be hard to hear, especially for those of you in your 20s and 30s. You think purpose is something you find when you're young, and then carry with you like a suitcase. But purpose changes. Sometimes, it gets lost. And if you're lucky, you get a second chance to carry it again. A few heads nodded. She saw tears in the eyes of a woman in the front row. Martha's voice softened, but carried even more force. This isn't a talk about technology. It's a talk about what happens when someone gives themselves permission to matter again. Neuralink was just the key. But I was the one who turned the lock. A long pause. Now, I spend my time teaching seniors how to use tech most people assume they'll never touch. I help connect 80-year-olds to VR experiences that bring tears to their eyes. I watch women who lost their hands to arthritis design their own tools with 3D printers. I've seen stroke survivors speak through AI speech tools, their families hearing their voices again for the first time in years. And I've learned that the greatest poverty in this country is not financial. It's emotional. It's the feeling of being left behind in a world that doesn't see you anymore. The room was still. No phones out. No heads down. Every eye on her. But here's what I believe, Martha said, her voice strong and clear. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too late. You are right on time. Applause broke the silence, soft at first, then rising like a wave. Martha stood in it, not soaking it in like applause but letting it wash through her, knowing this moment was not hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen. Everyone who had been told to slow down, to step aside, to be quiet. When she walked off the stage, the host caught her by the arm. "You just lit that room on fire," he whispered. "We've had Nobel Prize winners up there. You got more of a standing ovation than any of them." Martha smiled. "Because I spoke to their parents," she said. "And to their future selves." The video of her talk went live 2 weeks later. Within hours, it had 50,000 views. By the end of the week, 500,000. Then 1,000,000. Emails flooded in. Caregivers, seniors, disabled veterans, young people who hadn't spoken to their grandparents in years. One said, "You made me call my dad. Thank you." Another wrote, "I'm 82, and tomorrow I'm signing up for a class on robotics. I didn't know I was allowed to start again." Media outlets reached out. News shows asked her to appear. She declined most of them. Martha wasn't chasing fame. She was following meaning. But one invitation she accepted, a joint panel with members of the Neuralink research team, hosted by a National Health Innovation Summit. It felt right. It was full circle. On the day of the summit, she wore a navy blue blazer and slacks, her silver hair pinned back, her eyes alert and calm. The room was packed with doctors, engineers, investors, patients, policymakers. She spoke with grace and directness. When asked what Neuralink had done for her, she replied, "It gave me back the part of myself that wanted to contribute. Not just survive." The applause was long. After the panel, a young engineer approached her, barely out of grad school, nerves written all over his face. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, "I'm building part of the next-gen interface. Your story, it changed how I think about design. I just wanted to say thank you." Martha touched his arm. "Then your design will change more than the product. It will change lives." That night, back in her hotel room, she stood by the window and looked out over the city skyline. Neon and traffic. A heartbeat of light. She thought about her journey again. Not with nostalgia, but with awe. This wasn't what she had expected of her final chapter. It wasn't even a chapter anymore. It was a brand new book. And it was only halfway written. The reunion. The wind had a bite to it that December morning, but Martha didn't feel cold. Her coat was zipped up, her cane tucked under her arm, her steps slow but steady as she crossed the walkway from the parking lot toward the small ranch-style home she had once dreamed would be filled with laughter every holiday. It had been years since they'd all been together under one roof, David, Emily, and herself. And now, here they were, about to share a Christmas. Not just any Christmas. One that meant healing. One that meant trying again. A second chance not only for her body, her life, her purpose, but for her family. Emily arrived first, stepping out of a rideshare car with 2 carefully wrapped packages and a nervous smile. Her hair was shorter than Martha remembered, flecked with gray at the roots, her face thinner but glowing in that same quietly intense way it had even as a child. She stood at the edge of the driveway for a moment, uncertain, until Martha stepped forward and opened her arms. Emily didn't hesitate. She walked right into the embrace, her head resting on her mother's shoulder as if no years had passed. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "I'm really glad I came." "Me too," Martha replied, her voice catching. "So much." They stood like that for a moment longer, then slowly made their way inside. David arrived an hour later, carrying bags of groceries and a smile that lit up the room. "Okay," he said, dropping the bags on the counter. "I brought everything. Except for celery. I forgot the celery." Emily laughed from the living room. "Still the same David. What can I say?" he shrugged. "Some things never change." And just like that, they were a family again. Not perfect. Not pretending the past hadn't happened. But present. Together. The day unfolded in small, beautiful moments, Martha showing Emily how to use the smart oven she'd installed through her still-rising network, David helping decorate the tree with ornaments that hadn't been unpacked in years, the three of them making cocoa in the kitchen, laughing when David accidentally used salt instead of sugar. There was something sacred about the ordinariness of it. No stage lights, no audience, no applause. Just them. In the evening, after dinner, they sat in the living room, the fire flickering, soft holiday music playing from the corner speaker. Martha looked around at her children, grown now, changed by life but still tethered to her in ways no time or silence could sever. "I've been thinking," she said gently, "that I might sell the house." David looked up. "Really? I thought you loved this place." "I do," she said. "But I think I want to live closer to people like me. The still-rising community. I've been offered a place in a co-living project for seniors experimenting with technology. It's in Austin. They've got labs, workshops, therapy support. People rebuilding their lives. It's not a nursing home. It's a launching pad." Emily tilted her head. "Are you happy about it? Or just doing it for the movement?" Martha smiled. "I'm doing it because for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about something." David leaned forward. "Then I'm proud of you." "Honestly, Mom, I don't think I've ever said that out loud enough." Martha touched his hand. "You just did." Emily was quiet for a moment. "So what happens next?" she asked softly. "For you. For us." Martha took a breath, then said something that had been living inside her for months. "I want to build a curriculum. For people like us. To teach technology, yes, but also to teach worth. To remind people they're allowed to matter, even when society moves on without them. And I want both of you to help me. If you want." Silence filled the room, not an awkward silence, but a thick, emotional one. Emily looked at her brother. "I could help with design," she said. "Maybe branding, too." David smiled. "And I've been wanting to move into something more meaningful. Less software for some tech startup no one cares about. More, this." Martha's heart filled. This. A word so small, but so heavy with promise. They spent the next few hours sketching ideas, throwing out names, dreaming aloud like co-founders in a garage. It felt like building something sacred, not just for the world, but for themselves. For their bond. That night, after everyone went to bed, Martha sat alone in the living room with a notebook. She opened to a blank page and wrote at the top. Chapter 1, The School of Second Chances. Underneath it, she began drafting modules. The first one would be called, You're Not Too Late. Another, Fear is a Signpost, Not a Wall. She scribbled fast, without self-censoring. It flowed. It came not from theory, but from lived truth. She didn't need credentials. She had experience, scars, victories. In the quiet, she thought again about the path that had led her here. About the first time she had seen the Neuralink video. About the trembling in her hand the first time the implant had responded. About standing in front of a crowd and telling the world she was still here. And now, this moment, no stage, no mic, just a mother, writing a curriculum that might change someone else's life the way hers had been changed. She closed the notebook, placed it gently on the table, and turned off the lights. In the dark, she whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular, but maybe to all of it, the universe, the struggle, the joy. Thank you for not letting me quit. And for the first time in decades, on the night of a holiday that once felt like a reminder of everything she'd lost, Martha Rhodes went to sleep not with regret, not with pain, but with purpose. And purpose, she had learned, was the most powerful medicine of all. School of Second Chances. The warehouse looked like nothing at first. Just another concrete shell in an industrial zone outside Austin, Texas. But to Martha, it shimmered with possibility. Inside, the exposed beam stretched wide and high, and the sound of her cane tapping echoed like a drumroll across the concrete floor. She stepped through the space slowly, breathing it in, dusty, unfinished, and full of promise. A woman named Lana, a retired architect turned non-profit consultant, walked beside her, holding a tablet and pointing to floor plans. "We're thinking shared classrooms here, 3D printing lab over there, lounge spaces in the corners for peer sessions. The main space will stay open. Flexible for events, workshops, or just a place to dance once in a while." Martha smiled. "A dance floor for seniors learning robotics. That sounds like heaven." Lana grinned. "We like bending expectations." Martha reached out and touched one of the walls. Cold. Real. Just like the idea had once been, nothing but a crazy, stubborn thought that people over 60 weren't done learning, dreaming, or building. She had called it the School of Second Chances, half as a joke and half as a dare to the world. Now, with funding from a Tech Humanities grant and donations sparked by her viral TEDx talk, they were turning it into reality. The school would be for anyone 60 and up. No tuition. No tests. Just people hungry to reinvent their story through hands-on work with emerging technology. It wasn't about making seniors into coders or VR designers overnight. It was about reminding them that they still belonged in the conversation. That their value didn't shrink with age, it deepened. That evening, back at her apartment, Martha opened her laptop and joined a Zoom meeting with Emily and David. Their faces popped onto the screen, side by side like a pair of enthusiastic co-conspirators. "We're thinking colors for the branding," Emily said. "No more beige or teal. Let's go bold. Sunset orange. Deep purple. Colors that say, I'm alive." David chimed in, "And we've started mapping a digital platform. A mix of learning modules and storytelling. We want every student to upload a short video journal each week, kind of like their own memoir in real time." Martha nodded, amazed at what they were becoming together. This wasn't just a school. It was a family enterprise, a mission, a repair. Every call between them softened what had once been hardened. Every brainstorm was another patch sewn into the quilt of their reconnection. "You know," she said, "this is going to change more than lives. It's going to change how people see aging itself." Emily smiled. "That's the idea." Within weeks, the space transformed. Volunteers, some younger tech professionals, some aging adults who simply believed, showed up with paintbrushes, tools, second-hand furniture, and energy. Martha showed up every day, even when her body was tired, even when she had to rest after lunch. The implant still needed care, and she had limitations. But she led with vision, not velocity. When the doors opened 3 months later, the School of Second Chances welcomed its first cohort, 47 adults ranging from age 61 to 89. There were retired mechanics, former librarians, a Vietnam vet who hadn't held a soldering iron in 30 years, a former jazz musician who wanted to score his own video game. Some walked in on their own. Others came with walkers, canes, and wheelchairs. All of them carried something invisible, the weight of a world that had told them they were past their prime. Martha stood at the front of the room, beneath a hand-painted sign that read, "You are not too late." She spoke with clarity and calm. "This place exists because someone told me I was done, and they were wrong. I believe you're all here because you're not done either. You're curious. You're brave. You're tired of being sidelined. So, welcome. This is your space now." The first project was simple: build a prototype using any tool in the room, VR, voice command, AI sketch tools, or robotics, that solved a real problem in their own life. At first, many were hesitant. But soon, the air was electric with activity. A woman named June, 76, designed a voice-activated medication dispenser for her husband. A man named Larry built an app that translated spoken word into jazz notation. A quiet, widowed woman named Teresa used a digital scanner to create a 3D model of her late husband's war medals so she could leave a version of them for her grandkids. The joy was tangible. People came early and stayed late. They asked questions, failed, tried again, and supported one another like comrades in a new kind of battle, one not for survival, but for relevance. Media outlets covered it. One reporter called it Silicon Valley for the Silver Generation. Elon Musk himself posted a short message on X, "Age isn't the limit. It's the advantage." Salute to Martha and the School of Second Chances. It went viral in an hour. Still, Martha kept the focus small and personal. She met with every student. She asked them not just what they wanted to learn, but what they wanted to feel. Seen, they often said. Useful. Less invisible. One afternoon, Teresa, the widow with the metal project, stayed after class. "I used to think the best part of my life had already happened," she said. "But now I think it's happening right now." Martha felt tears rise but held them. "That's what I want every person to feel who walks through these doors," she said. "That today can be a beginning, not just a memory." As the months passed, the school grew. A second cohort joined. Then a third. People flew in from other states just to visit, to volunteer, to see what was possible when you believed that old dreams didn't have to stay buried. Some students even got offers from tech companies to test senior accessible features. Others were asked to give talks. Not everyone became a tech expert, but everyone became an example. On the anniversary of the school's launch, they held a celebration. Food trucks lined the street. A stage was set up for live music. Students showcased their projects. Martha stood before the crowd once more, no notes, no script, only the truth in her heart. "You all taught me something," she said. "You taught me that purpose doesn't end when your job ends. That creativity doesn't die with youth. That it's never too late to become someone new. We are not relics. We are architects of what comes next." The crowd erupted in applause. Martha looked out at them, students, family, friends, strangers who had found each other. And she realized, this was the real Neuralink. Not the device in her brain, but the link between hearts, stories, and second chances. A network of people rewiring what life after 60 could be. As the sun set over Austin that night, Martha stood at the edge of the parking lot, looking back at the glowing windows of the school. She didn't feel tired. She felt timeless. In the golden haze of the evening, surrounded by laughter, invention, and the sound of a generation rising to its feet again, Martha knew this wasn't just a chapter in her story. It was a movement. And it was just getting started. The interview that changed everything. Martha never expected to sit across from a nationally televised news anchor again, but there she was, on a sleek white couch in a New York studio, surrounded by cameras, lights, and a production team that kept referring to her as our most anticipated guest this month. She was wearing a simple navy dress, the same one she had worn for the school's one-year anniversary, and a discreet microphone was clipped to her collar. She didn't fidget. She didn't need to rehearse. She had lived this story. Her fingers still curled gently around the cane that had become more symbol than support now. A producer leaned in moments before the segment started and whispered, "The audience is emotional already. The teaser clip of your students went viral on social last night." Martha nodded quietly, heart calm, eyes steady. When the camera light turned red, the host smiled at her and launched in. "My next guest is the founder of something revolutionary, not just in the world of tech, but in the world of aging, resilience, and what it means to start over." At 72, after suffering partial paralysis, Martha Rhodes didn't give up. She signed up for an experimental technology called Neuralink. 2 years later, she's walking, building, and changing the way America sees age. Please welcome her. The applause from the in-studio audience was thunderous. Martha offered a small smile and nodded once, acknowledging their warmth without letting it swell her ego. The host leaned forward. Martha, people see you as a kind of modern miracle. But you've said again and again, you don't want to be seen as a medical marvel. You want to be seen as proof of something much deeper. What is that? Martha looked directly into the camera. I want to be seen as proof that relevance doesn't expire. That contribution doesn't have an age limit. That if a 72-year-old woman can learn brain-computer interfaces and then turn that into a place where others can reinvent their lives, then no one, not a single person, is too far gone. The host nodded slowly, visibly moved. Let's talk about the school of second chances. We've seen the videos. Seniors programming their first apps. Designing smart devices. Laughing like kids. What's going on in that building that the rest of the country seems to be missing? Simple, Martha said. We're not trying to fix old people. We're reminding them they were never broken. The audience clapped again. Martha continued, for too long, we've acted like the only innovators are in their 20s. But wisdom matters. Memory matters. When you combine lived experience with modern tools, something incredible happens. People come alive again. And when they do, they don't just improve their own lives, they uplift everyone around them. The host leaned in. You've said before that Elon Musk was the spark. That one quote of his changed your entire trajectory. Have you two ever met? Martha shook her head. Not in person. But I've spoken with members of his Neuralink team. Some even visited the school. And I know he's watching, in his own way. What would you say to him, if he were sitting here right now? The question caught Martha off guard for a second, not because she hadn't thought about it, but because she had imagined this moment so many times, she wasn't sure what version of her answer would rise to the surface. Then, she said it clearly. I'd say thank you for reminding me that the future wasn't closed off to people like me. For building something crazy enough that it made me rethink everything I believed about my own limits. I don't worship tech, but I respect the people who dare to push it forward, especially when it brings others along for the ride. The host nodded, then turned serious. There are critics, of course. Some say the technology is dangerous, or that it favors those who already have access and privilege. Some say seniors shouldn't be guinea pigs. Martha didn't flinch. I understand that. I really do. But those critics should spend an afternoon at my school. Talk to the 83-year-old man who built a tool so he could write his memoir with one eye. Or the woman who lost her speech after a stroke and now tells bedtime stories to her grandkids again using voice synthesis tools she helped train. These aren't guinea pigs. These are pioneers. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause again. After the interview wrapped, the segment aired in full across the country, and within hours, Martha's inbox flooded. Donations. Volunteer offers. Veterans asking how to enroll. Grandchildren writing in to help enroll their grandparents. One message simply said, "You gave me permission to hope again." But what Martha didn't expect came a few days later, in the form of a call from a private number. She almost didn't answer it, but something told her to. "Hello?" she said cautiously. The voice on the other end was quiet, calm, unmistakable. Martha Rhodes? Yes. A pause. Then, "This is Elon Musk. I watched your interview." Martha didn't respond for a full second. Then she said, calmly, "Thank you for calling." Elon continued, "You said something about contribution. That hit me. Because most people misunderstand what technology is for. It's not to replace people. It's to give more people a chance to contribute longer, deeper, better. You embodied that. I wanted to ask if you'd be open to visiting one of our new labs. We're designing interfaces for real-time adaptive learning, using lived experience as data. I think your insight could help us shape it." Martha's breath caught for a second. Then she answered, "Of course. I'd be honored. The trip was arranged in days. A private flight. A black car waiting at the terminal. She didn't need luxury, but she understood now, when your story reaches people in power, doors open that once felt locked forever. The lab itself was unlike anything she'd seen. Glass walls, no shoes allowed inside, robotic arms in constant gentle motion, and a row of people of all ages testing interfaces that responded to thought, breath, even emotion. One of the lead engineers, a woman in her early 30s, walked Martha through a prototype designed for seniors with declining mobility and sight. The idea, she explained, is that we stop seeing decline as the end of input. We want to make systems that adapt to aging bodies rather than require bodies to adapt to systems. Martha studied the device. Have you tested it with anyone over 70? Not yet. Martha nodded. Then let me be your first. The team laughed gently, respectfully, but she meant it. Over the next 2 hours, she worked with them. Offered feedback. Pointed out things only someone with her lived experience could catch. They didn't treat her like a token guest, they treated her like a colleague. Before she left, Elon stopped by the testing chamber, and they finally met face to face. No media. No cameras. Just two people who had, in very different ways, pushed against time and expectation. Thank you, she said. For building the impossible. It made me believe I could do the same. Elon nodded. We're just getting started. That night, flying back to Austin, she looked out the plane window at the moonlight slicing across the clouds. Her cane rested beside her. Her neural implant gently humming its invisible song. She thought of her students. Of Emily and David. Of the thousands of people now watching her journey and whispering to themselves, maybe I'm not too late either. She smiled, leaned her head back, and whispered to the sky, let's see what tomorrow brings. The waiting list, the emails came in waves now, hundreds a day, then thousands. Handwritten letters began arriving too, from places Martha hadn't thought about in years, rural Kansas, the heart of the Bronx, a Navajo reservation in Arizona, a trailer park in Florida, a senior center in Alaska. Each one carried its own voice, its own ache, its own version of the same message, I saw you on TV. I watched the videos. Please, how do I join? It became clear quickly that the School of Second Chances was no longer a local program. It was a movement. The original building in Austin, once more than enough, now looked like a matchbox compared to the scope of what was needed. They had room for 50 students at a time. Now over 14,000 people were on the waiting list. Martha stared at the numbers one night, sitting at her kitchen table long after midnight, the glow of the screen casting a soft halo on her silver hair. She scrolled through the applications, each one a story, a need, a plea. A 78-year-old former factory worker who wanted to design a better brace for his arthritic hands. A 65-year-old retired schoolteacher who had lost her speech after a stroke and wanted to learn how to use AI text-to-speech to read her poetry again. A 72-year-old man in a VA home who said he just wanted to matter to someone again. Martha's hands trembled, not from the implant, but from the weight of it all. How do you say no to someone whose only request is to feel alive again? How do you build enough space for people who have been told their time is up? Emily and David joined the emergency call the next morning. We need satellites, Emily said bluntly. We franchise this, not like McDonald's, but like a template. Train the trainer. We build a system other communities can adopt. David nodded. Licensing, open source curriculum, a tech support network. We make it replicable. Local chapters with national standards. It'll take investment, but we can do it. Martha listened, heart pounding, not with fear, but fire. We make it modular, she added. No city should have to start from scratch. We send a starter kit, hardware, training, lesson plans, maybe even a microgrant to help them get off the ground. Within weeks, they had a name, Still Rising Chapters. The team grew from 3 to 30. They brought in retired educators, engineers, community leaders, therapists, storytellers. All of them over 60. All of them ready to lead. They started by choosing 5 pilot cities: Detroit, Sacramento, Tulsa, Asheville, and Rochester, each with unique demographics, each with underserved senior populations. The still rising core team didn't just launch programs. They listened. They asked, "What do you need? What makes you feel powerful? What would you build, if you believed you still could?" In Detroit, a group of retired auto workers used their training to design robotic gardening arms for those with arthritis. In Tulsa, a Cherokee elder helped translate parts of the curriculum into her native language, turning the program into a bridge for cultural preservation through tech. In Sacramento, a cohort of Chinese American women built a virtual tea ceremony platform, preserving family rituals through immersive VR. Martha visited each site personally, even when travel exhausted her. She showed up not to inspect, but to inspire. She spoke with students, hugged volunteers, offered quiet encouragement when someone struggled with the interface or doubted their place. At each site, someone asked her the same question: "Why are you doing this? You could be retired. Resting." She always gave the same answer: "Because I rested for too long. Now I rise, and I bring others with me." One day in Rochester, a woman named Linda, 84 years old, approached her after a workshop. She had tears in her eyes. "Martha," she whispered, "I hadn't touched a computer in 20 years. I never thought I'd be needed again. But yesterday, I helped my grandson build a game. And I'm not just proud, I feel alive." Martha hugged her, long and hard. "That's the whole point," she said. "Not to use technology. To use yourself again." The national media began to follow the story closely. News features, podcasts, even documentaries. One headline read, "The revolution that started with a cane." Another, "Neuralink helped her walk, but her vision helped thousands rise." Even political leaders began to take notice. Policy advocates reached out to discuss funding for senior tech education. Think tanks invited Martha to speak. A senator from Ohio proposed a bill called the Legacy Innovation Act, modeled on the principles of the School of Second Chances. But it wasn't the policy that moved Martha. It was the people. The 69-year-old man who built a VR memory palace to help with early dementia. The 77-year-old woman who designed a wearable that could detect loneliness based on speech and encourage connection. The retired engineer who taught others how to repair devices instead of discarding them, turning the school into a hub of sustainable innovation. The waiting list continued to grow, now 40,000 names long. But it no longer overwhelmed her. Because now, she had an army. Not one of soldiers, but of storytellers, builders, dreamers, healers. A generation reborn through possibility. Back in Austin, the original building remained the heart of it all. On the anniversary of the national expansion, they held a live-streamed event called Still Rising Live. Tens of thousands tuned in. Martha stood on stage, flanked by students and chapter leaders from every pilot city, and spoke not as a survivor, not as a founder, but as a friend. "We were told our value had an expiration date," she said. "But we rewrote the label. We were told technology was for the young. But we rewrote the user manual. We were told our best days were behind us. But we built new days. Brighter ones. Together." The applause wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. The kind that comes when people recognize something sacred is happening. And sacred it was. Not in the way of temples or churches, but in the quiet, relentless belief that humans, no matter their age, are capable of transformation. After the event, David found her sitting quietly in the garden behind the school. The Texas sky was streaked orange and violet. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" She turned to him, her eyes bright. For phase 2. David laughed. There's a phase 2. Always, she said. Until we make sure every last person on that list knows they're not too late. And so the waiting list became not a burden, but a beacon. Not a wall, but a bridge. Not a countdown, but a promise. A promise that still rising wasn't a slogan. It was a movement. And it was far from finished. The legacy engine, the hum of activity in the main hall of the School of Second Chances had changed over time. It wasn't just the sound of people learning, it was the sound of systems being born. Laughter, voice commands, printers whirring, code being spoken aloud, robotic limbs being tested by hands once forgotten by the world. Martha walked slowly through the corridor that led to what the team now called the legacy engine, a wing dedicated to projects that would outlast every student and teacher who contributed to it. It was a digital and physical archive, but not of the past, it was for the future, crafted by those who had lived long enough to know what truly matters. She reached the doorway, where a small bronze plaque read, "Stories that Shape Tomorrow." Inside, rows of stations lined the walls. Each booth was equipped with adaptive tech, voice-to-text AI, brainwave-driven transcription tools, memory mapping interfaces, video editing bays with massive tactile buttons. But the real innovation was in the interface design, intuitive, forgiving, and joyful. This was not technology built for profit, it was built for people. The first person she saw was Hank, age 87, a retired train conductor from Ohio. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones and laughing as he dictated a story into the system. The interface translated his voice into animated scenes, complete with characters drawn to resemble his younger self. On the screen, a cartoon version of Hank was riding a train through the Rockies, waving at passengers, telling jokes to kids in the dining car. "This one's for my great-granddaughter," Hank said, lifting the headset. "She's never seen a train up close, but now she'll ride with me whenever she wants." Martha smiled, placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly why we built this, Hank." Across the room, Teresa, yes, the same Teresa who 18 months earlier had cried while scanning her husband's medals, was now teaching a microclass on building voice memoirs using emotional metadata. She was showing others how to tag parts of their life story not just by time, but by feeling, joy, regret, rage, pride, so future listeners could experience the emotional truth of a life, not just the facts. "What we leave behind," Teresa said to the group, "shouldn't just be memories. It should be maps." That line stuck with Martha. It echoed in her mind as she watched more students document their journeys. Not for applause, but for legacy. One man was building a digital repair manual for 1960s-era appliances. A woman in her 90s was crafting lullabies in her native Haitian Creole and embedding them into a virtual storybook for children of immigrants who felt caught between languages. These weren't side projects. They were declarations. Every artifact in the legacy engine was curated into what they called the Time Vault. It was backed up to both physical drives and cloud nodes across multiple servers, with the goal of preserving at least 10,000 unique life legacies by the end of the decade. The most revolutionary part? The students themselves built the system's architecture. David had made sure of that. Under his guidance, Still Rising had formed a volunteer tech guild made up of students, many of whom had never touched a keyboard before the school, who now managed core updates, designed accessible front ends, and trained AI systems using their own input. The future wasn't being built for them. It was being built by them. One afternoon, as Martha returned from a legacy session, she passed by the new student orientation room. Through the window, she saw a new group had just arrived. Many of them looked uncertain, some even frightened. One man sat in a corner, arms crossed, eyes hard. She recognized that posture. It was the armor of someone who had spent years being overlooked. She stepped inside, not as a founder or icon, but just another member of the tribe. "I know what some of you are thinking," she said to the room, "that this place might be too advanced, or that you might not belong. The group turned toward her, curious. I used to think that too. The first day I walked into a room full of machines I didn't understand, I nearly walked out. But then I remembered, machines are just tools. And tools are just extensions of hands. Hands like ours. She held hers up. Slightly gnarled. Worn. Still moving. The world may not always recognize our value. But we do. And that's why you're here. Not to catch up. To contribute. Slowly, one by one, arms uncrossed. The man in the corner met her eyes and nodded once. That night, back in her apartment, Martha reviewed the daily uploads from the Time Vault. She tried to do this at least once a week, to stay connected to the heartbeat of what they were building. Today's featured submission came from a 66-year-old woman named Rosemary, who had survived breast cancer, 2 hurricanes, and the loss of her only child. On the screen, Rosemary spoke into the camera with gentle strength. For a long time, I didn't think I had anything left to give. I was just existing. But now, I've built a digital garden. It's full of the plants my mother used to grow in Puerto Rico. I coded the wind sounds, the way the flowers sway. I even added her humming voice. When my granddaughter clicks on it from anywhere in the world, it's like she's stepping into her great-grandmother's soul. Martha watched in silence, a tear sliding down her cheek. It struck her again, this wasn't about tech. It never had been. It was about agency. About restoring what had been taken by time, trauma, or neglect. These stories were engines, not just of memory, but of motion. That was the secret. The legacy engine wasn't just preserving the past. It was powering the future. Months passed. The legacy wing expanded. Donations flowed in. More chapters opened. Still Rising became a fixture not just in aging communities, but in national conversations about longevity, labor, and what a meaningful life looks like after 60. Universities requested collaborations. Museums asked for legacy engine exhibits. And then, one spring morning, Martha received a letter, not an email, not a DM, but an actual letter, handwritten in ink on thick paper. It was from Elon Musk. He wrote simply, "What you're doing is more important than anything I've built. Not because it's bigger, but because it reminds us why we build at all. If there's anything I can do to expand your work, say the word." Martha sat with the letter for a long time. She didn't need money. She didn't need publicity. What she needed was endurance. "There is something you can do," she wrote back. "Help us build the long game. Not a flash in the pan. A century of relevance. A culture that never again forgets its elders. Partner with us on the archive. Let's make the legacy engine permanent, sovereign, and free." The reply came days later. One word, yes. A meeting was scheduled. The archive project was born. A permanent digital space where every story collected by Still Rising would be hosted forever, secure, public, and open source. Martha looked at the timeline. It would take years. She might not live to see the final version. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that it would live. That the lives of those who had once been discarded would become the foundation of something eternal. And as she walked once more through the legacy wing, watching students build their memories into machines, it hit her with full force. This wasn't just about living longer. It was about living louder. And no matter how much time she had left, she was using every second to turn that volume all the way up. When the past comes knocking, the letter came on a Tuesday, buried under a stack of donation receipts, event invites, and a hand-drawn thank you card from a student in the Tulsa chapter. Martha nearly missed it. The envelope was plain, no return address, the kind of thing she might have thrown out without a second glance. But something about it, maybe the slanted handwriting, maybe the quietness of the paper, made her pause. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear whatever was inside. The note was only a few lines long. No greeting. No signature. Just, I saw you on television. I never thought I'd see your face again. I've wanted to reach out for years, but I didn't think I had the right. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. My name is Adam. I think you remember me. She dropped the paper. The name hit like a piano crashing through the ceiling. Adam. Her son. Her firstborn. The one she hadn't seen in over 30 years. The boy who ran off at 17, angry and brilliant, whose last words to her were shouted over the sound of a slamming door and police sirens. Her knees went weak. The room blurred. She sat down fast, her cane clattering to the floor. For years, she'd wondered if he was alive. She'd searched online in quiet moments, typed his name into search bars, tried not to feel the shame that came from not knowing how to be his mother. Now, all these years later, he was reaching out. She clutched the letter. Fear and joy danced violently in her chest. Was it real? Was it safe? Was she ready? That night, she didn't sleep. She walked the garden path behind the school in circles until the sky turned from navy to gray. By morning, she made her decision. She would write back. Dear Adam. I do remember you. I've remembered you every single day since you left. I'm not angry. I'm not interested in blame. If you want to talk, I'm here. She didn't write anything more. No explanations. No pleading. No attempts to rewrite the past. Just the door, left open. A week passed. Then two. Then a call came, not from Adam, but from a woman named Sarah. Hi, she said nervously. You don't know me, but I'm Adam's daughter. I'm your granddaughter. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Her heart skipped. Oh, she whispered. You're real. Sarah laughed softly. Yeah. I'm real. He asked me to reach out first. He's scared. He thinks maybe it's too late. It's not, Martha said immediately. Not if he's breathing. Not if he's reaching. They arranged a visit. Not public. Not part of the movement. Just private. Quiet. Human. When Adam finally stepped into her office 2 weeks later, Martha barely recognized him. His hair was silver at the temples, his shoulders broader than she remembered. But the eyes were the same, piercing, unsure, searching. Hi, Mom, he said. The words cracked something inside her. She stood, slow but steady, and walked toward him. Hi, son. There were no hugs at first. Just space. A pause. A long moment of silence stretched between them before he finally said, You look good. She smiled softly. So do you. Then came the stories. He'd been a mechanic, then a teacher, then, surprisingly, a hospice volunteer. He had married young, divorced, remarried, had 2 daughters. He had carried her photo in his wallet all those years, even through their silence. I was ashamed, he said. Of how I left. Of how I blamed you. It wasn't your fault. I didn't know how to forgive myself. And I didn't think you'd want me back. I always wanted you back, she said. But I had to learn to want myself, too. They sat for hours. Laughed. Cried. They even fought a little. But when the sun set, he was still there. And for the first time in over 3 decades, she felt something click back into place, something bone deep, like a puzzle piece finally locking into its corner. Over the next few weeks, Adam came by often. He met Emily. Sat in on a class. He was quiet at first, but he watched. Then one afternoon, he asked if he could volunteer. I'm not fancy, he said. I don't know coding. But I know machines. I know how to fix things. If you've got old folks with broken keyboards or jammed printers, I could help. He did more than help. He brought a new kind of energy to the school. Practical. Grounded. He'd sit with students, show them how to clean out dust from circuit boards, explain what a capacitor did in plain language. People trusted him. One day, Hank looked up from a disassembled monitor and said, "You remind me of my son. Haven't talked to him in years. But you've got the same hands." Adam just nodded and kept working. He didn't have to say anything. That was his gift, making people feel seen without needing to say it out loud. Sarah came to visit soon after. She was in her late 20s, worked in clean energy policy, and walked through the legacy wing with wide eyes. "I had no idea this existed," she said. "My dad never talked much about his family. I thought maybe there was nothing good back here." "There's a lot good," Martha said. "And a lot broken. But we're rebuilding it, one conversation at a time." Sarah asked if she could help build an environmental curriculum for the school: green tech, sustainability, circular design thinking. "It's what I do," she said. "But doing it with you would mean more than anything." Soon, 3 generations were working under one roof. Not as a happy, perfect family, but as people who had made the choice to reconnect. To do the hard work. To turn the past into purpose. One morning, while reviewing a legacy submission from a woman who had survived the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, Martha turned to Adam and asked, "Do you want to record your story?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure it's worth recording." "It is," she said. "Even the ugly parts." So he did. He sat in front of the legacy interface and spoke for 2 hours straight. He talked about his mistakes, his regrets, the years he spent angry and unreachable. And then he talked about finding his mother again, how he started to believe in second chances. When it was done, the AI rendered it into a visual map, a winding road, broken in places, but always heading toward a light on the hill. "That light is you," he said, showing Martha the screen. "That's what I was always heading toward. Even when I didn't know it." Martha placed her hand on his. "And now we shine it for others." That evening, a new page appeared on the Still Rising website, Family Legacies. It was a space not just for individual stories, but for shared ones, fractured and mended, tangled and true. Because healing doesn't always start from within. Sometimes it starts when the past comes knocking, and you have the courage to open the door. A wider horizon. Martha sat in her favorite seat at the head of the long table that now served as both conference hub and creative command center for Still Rising. The early morning light spilled through the windows, painting soft gold accents beneath rows of whiteboards scribbled with ideas, lesson themes, expansion maps, curriculum designs, and a timeline that stretched not just for months but for years. She glanced across at Emily and David, their faces bright with determination, and realized how far they had come together, from fractured family to purpose-powered partners. Today, they were joined by Dr. Lawrence Choi, a neuroscientist from the University of Miami, where Neuralink trials were changing lives. His visit was significant. He had called it a meeting of vision and impact. They leaned over the table, reviewing a new proposal called the Still Rising Worldwide Initiative. The plan reflected what had become increasingly clear: they had sparked more than a movement, they had ignited a spark line reaching around the country. Martha tapped her cane gently. "More letters have come in overnight: Lebanon, Kenya, Alaska. The waiting list is global, not just national. They're not just asking for access, they're asking to rise." Emily's fingers flew over a laptop. "Our modular curriculum can adapt to cultural context, but we need partnerships in other countries. Local champions who believe the same." Dr. Choi nodded. "I've seen the same hunger at our clinical sites. Latin America, Southeast Asia, they want to adopt this model for older adults and patients alike." The floor vibrated with urgency and possibility. They decided to pilot in 3 international hubs: Mexico City, Nairobi, and Manchester, each chosen for vibrant aging populations and local partners eager to co-create. They'd begin by sending out starter kits, hardware, curriculum guides, and funding to launch local copies of the School of Second Chances. Martha felt a lump in her throat. This was evolution. And it all started with one heart beating against defeat. Meanwhile, Neuralink's trials were surging forward. Dr. Choi pulled up news headlines: Nuevo paciente puede controlar su teléfono con la mente, a Spanish feature on another breakthrough. In the US, RJ and Audrey Cruz were sharing their stories of telepathic control, one turning on his TV, the other typing and drawing for the first time in decades. And Bradford, editing YouTube videos, narrating in his own voice through AI, all with just thought. The world was watching. Meanwhile, Neuralink had just completed a $650 million funding round to accelerate development, including speech and vision restoration devices, and next-gen implants with thousands of electrodes. And they'd received FDA breakthrough designation for vision-restoring, blind sight, alongside their speech restoration prototype. The team felt the weight of their generational opportunity. What began as a spark in a quiet room had become a global luminosity. Let's invite more voices, Martha said. Braille storytellers, elders from First Nations, neurodiverse folks. We aren't just teaching, they're teaching us. David grinned. We can call it legacies in many tongues. Emily's eyes glowed. And we'll film it, short documentaries, so the world sees them, not as recipients, but as creators. They carved out a roadmap, documentary series, global chapters, multilingual curriculum, cross-cultural exchanges, funded by a new foundation, the Still Rising Legacy Fund. And in those first hours, the idea of the legacy engine expanded again, not just archiving memory, but weaving a global quilt of intergenerational connection. Later, alone in the empty hall, Martha tapped a news clip on her tablet, about Neuralink's promise to restore hearing even to those deaf since birth. The possibilities felt beyond science, they were bridges to reconnection, to redemption, to renewal. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet, "We will rise them all." And in that moment, she understood the horizon wasn't distant. It was right here, wide enough for all of them. The unexpected gift. Martha never imagined that a single phone call could shift the entire trajectory of her life. It was a crisp fall morning when her phone rang, breaking the quiet hum of the school's morning routine. The caller ID flashed an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something inside told her to pick up. "Hello, is this Martha Green?" a soft voice asked. "Yes, this is she. My name is Rachel Martinez. I'm calling from the neurology department at Mercy Hospital in Tulsa. We have a patient who could benefit from your legacy engine project." Martha's heart skipped. Patients reaching out through hospitals, instead of the other way around, this was new. "Tell me more," she said. Rachel explained that a man named George Whitman, 73, had recently suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak or move his right hand. His family was overwhelmed, desperate for ways to connect with him. But the doctors thought the neural implants, paired with the legacy engine, could be the key to unlocking his voice. "Would you be willing to meet him?" Rachel asked. Martha didn't hesitate. Within days, she was at Mercy Hospital, standing beside George's bed. The room smelled of antiseptic and old wood, the window overlooking a grove of maple trees just turning brilliant amber. George's eyes fluttered open when she entered. Despite the paralysis, there was a spark. A flicker of recognition. She pulled up the legacy engine tablet and spoke gently. "Hello, George. My name is Martha. I know you've been through a lot. We want to help you tell your story." His eyes seemed to respond, blinking slowly. The medical team attached Neuralink's interface to his scalp with practiced care. Over the next several days, the school's technology team worked remotely to configure the legacy engine's interface for George's use. It was delicate work. The software had to learn to translate his neural signals into words, pictures, and emotions. They called it the Mind Bridge. Martha watched as George began to speak through the interface, first simple words, then short sentences. His family was amazed. The silence that had stretched for weeks began to crumble. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled into the room, George's daughter Mary sat beside him, tears streaming. "Dad, can you tell me what you're thinking?" she whispered. George's fingers twitched slightly, the legacy engine translating, "I'm here. I'm with you. I love you." The room filled with a quiet joy. Word spread quickly. More patients, more families wanted to try the combination of Neuralink and the legacy engine. Martha realized this was bigger than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about stories, it was about restoring dignity and voice to those trapped inside bodies that had betrayed them. Back at the school, the team expanded training for volunteers and caregivers. Emily led workshops for family members, teaching them how to support loved ones as they reconnected through technology. One day, a letter arrived from a rural clinic in Montana. They wanted to pilot a remote version of the Mind Bridge for patients who couldn't travel. Martha's heart swelled. The legacy was reaching even the most isolated corners. Meanwhile, her own body reminded her of time's passage. Her knees ached on cold mornings, her balance faltered occasionally. But she pushed forward, fueled by a deep purpose. The school had become more than a project, it was a lifeline. Then came a surprise visit from Adam and Sarah, who had flown in from Chicago. Adam brought news of his own. He had decided to return to Tulsa permanently, to dedicate himself to mentoring younger generations through the school. Sarah was launching a new environmental initiative to collaborate with Still Rising's curriculum. Martha felt a quiet pride. The family she thought she lost was coming together in ways she hadn't dared to hope for. One evening, after a long day of planning, Martha sat alone on the back porch, looking out at the stars. The air smelled faintly of pine and earth. She whispered to the night, "Thank you, Elon." The man who had once been a distant figure, a symbol of fearless change and radical possibility, had become something more, a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that it's never too late to rise again. Martha smiled, knowing the journey wasn't over. The unexpected gift of connection, technology, and renewed purpose had opened a door she would never close. And she wasn't walking through it alone. The ripple effect: the moment Martha stepped onto the stage at the National Aging Summit in Chicago, she felt the weight of every eye in the room. The auditorium was packed with healthcare professionals, policymakers, caregivers, and advocates for the elderly, many of whom had seen firsthand the heartbreak of aging without hope. The large screen behind her flickered to life, displaying images of Still Rising students, elderly men and women, once isolated and silent, now vibrant, connected, and alive with purpose. Martha took a deep breath. What if I told you that the limitations we accept about aging, declining bodies, lost voices, fading memories, aren't the final chapter? What if I told you we can rewrite the story for millions of people who feel forgotten? The room was silent, hanging on every word. For years, I believed I was too old to change, too late to matter. But then I discovered a spark, a voice, actually, that challenged everything. Elon Musk once said, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That's when I knew I had to fight. She shared the story of her own struggles, the loneliness after her husband's passing, the ache of missed chances, and the small steps that led her to the legacy engine and Neuralink's breakthroughs. She showed videos of George Whitman communicating for the first time in months, of Audrey Cruz drawing on a digital canvas with her mind, and of R.J. Cruz walking again, the aid of Neuralink's robotic limbs syncing seamlessly with his brain signals. "This isn't science fiction," Martha said. "It's happening now. It's happening because we refuse to accept that old age meant silence and invisibility." Questions flooded the room. How scalable was the legacy engine? Could Neuralink's devices be affordable? Were these technologies safe? Martha answered with honesty, describing the challenges of funding, accessibility, and skepticism they faced. and how community partnerships and advocacy were breaking down barriers. She emphasized the importance of dignity, choice, and inclusion. After her talk, a line formed. People shared stories of aging parents, veterans, neighbors, and themselves. Some came with tears, others with fierce determination. One woman, a retired nurse named Linda, hugged Martha tightly. "You've given me hope for my mother, who stopped speaking last year. This could change everything." Across the country, the ripple effect spread. News outlets picked up Martha's story and the growing movement of elder empowerment through technology and creativity. A popular podcast featured her interview, resulting in thousands of calls to Still Rising from people wanting to learn and join. In small towns and big cities, grassroots groups formed to support older adults in using neural implants and storytelling tools. Digital communities blossomed where people shared experiences, art, and advice. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's Neuralink continued to push boundaries, rolling out new features like real-time translation for users with speech impairments and mind-controlled mobility aids. The FDA's approvals opened doors to Medicare and insurance coverage discussions, making access more feasible for many seniors. Still Rising received a major grant from a national foundation dedicated to aging innovation, enabling expansion into underserved communities. Martha watched as volunteers trained caregivers in remote areas, taught workshops in nursing homes, and brought technology to places where hope had long felt distant. The school's alumni network grew stronger, people once resigned to silence now mentors to others. Martha's own journey mirrored this evolution. The woman who once doubted her worth now led a movement changing the face of aging. At home, Adam and Sarah launched a community garden project, connecting elders with local youth, blending environmental stewardship with intergenerational bonds. David spearheaded a digital archive of personal stories submitted from around the world, hundreds of voices united in resilience and renewal. One evening, Martha received a message from George Whitman's family. "Dad is giving a speech at his local senior center. He says it's thanks to you and your team that he found his voice again." Tears welled as Martha imagined the ripple spreading outward, touching lives she might never meet but feeling intimately connected to. It was more than technology, it was a movement of hearts and minds. And it all began with one choice: to rise again. As the sun set over Tulsa, Martha stood on her porch, feeling the quiet hum of progress. Somewhere, a new student was opening the legacy engine for the first time. Somewhere, another person was defying limits, writing their own story with the help of Elon Musk's vision and a community that refused to give up. The ripple would never stop. The new legacy. Martha sat quietly in the dim light of her living room, the soft hum of the legacy engine tablet resting on her lap. Outside, the evening settled gently over Tulsa, the familiar sounds of distant traffic, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, the faint rustle of trees. It was a peaceful moment, but inside, Martha felt a surge of emotions: gratitude, hope, and an undeniable sense of purpose fulfilled and yet still unfolding. She thought back to that very first day she felt like fading away, invisible to the world, burdened by loss and regret. Back then, she never imagined that the woman she was would become the woman she had become: a guide, a connector, a catalyst for transformation not just in herself but in countless others. The school had grown beyond her wildest dreams, from a small classroom with a few curious students to a global network of changemakers reclaiming their lives and voices. She traced her finger across the tablet's screen, scrolling through hundreds of stories, art pieces, messages, and memories shared by elders around the world. Each one was a testament to human resilience, to the refusal to let age define worth or limit dreams. Somewhere in there was George Whitman's video, his trembling but triumphant voice telling the story of rediscovery. Audrey Crew's digital paintings that had sparked exhibitions. R.J. Crew's inspirational blog chronicling his journey from paralysis to mobility. And countless others who had found their spark. Martha leaned back, the soft chair embracing her like an old friend. She smiled softly as she recalled the moment Elon Musk's words first challenged her: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Those words had been the spark, but the fire was fed by community, courage, and love. Her phone chimed softly, a message from David, board meeting tomorrow. We'll discuss the Still Rising Legacy Fund's new initiatives. Exciting times ahead. She tapped out a quick reply, then set the phone aside. The Legacy Fund had become their vehicle to sustain and expand their work, funding scholarships, research, accessibility programs, and cross-cultural projects. It was more than money, it was a promise to future generations that age would never be a sentence to invisibility again. As she gazed out the window, Martha reflected on the relationships that had reshaped her life. Adam and Sarah's renewed commitment to Tulsa, blending environmental activism with elder advocacy. Emily's tireless efforts to bring technology and empathy together. David's storytelling genius that connected hearts worldwide. And the countless students who had become teachers, mentors, and friends. She realized that the journey was never just about technology or innovation. It was about reclaiming identity, finding meaning, and building legacy. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the soft chime of a video call. Martha's eyes lit up as she recognized the face on the screen, George Whitman, smiling broadly, sitting comfortably in his living room, his daughter Mary beside him. "Hello, Martha," he said, his voice steady but warm. "We wanted to thank you, from the bottom of our hearts. You gave me a voice again, a way to share my story and connect with my family. I never thought that was possible after the stroke." Martha's throat tightened. "George, you did the work. You fought through the silence. We just helped open the door." Mary smiled. "He's been telling everyone at the senior center about Still Rising and the Legacy Engine. They say he's an inspiration." "That's the power of the new legacy we're building," Martha said softly. "Stories that refuse to be silenced." After the call ended, Martha sat back, tears of joy welling. The journey, from loneliness to connection, from despair to purpose, was everything she had hoped for and more. She thought of the thousands still waiting for their chance, and the thousands yet to be reached. The road ahead was long but filled with promise. That night, Martha wrote in her journal, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." It was a truth she wished every elder could feel. As the moon rose high, casting silver light through the windows, Martha closed her eyes and whispered a vow, to keep rising, keep fighting, and keep lighting the way for all who dared to believe in new beginnings. Elon Musk's vision had been the spark, but the flame belonged to everyone who refused to give up on life, love, and legacy. And so, the story continued, an unbroken chain of hope stretching across time, generations, and hearts. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?